As you get deeper into using Listen Layer, you may come across some advanced situations where you need to target what we would call native data. This video focuses on the native browser storage feature specifically, which allows you to identify and target browser storage activity that occurs in the user's browser. And once that information is seen by the listener, it will be pushed into the data layer based on various settings that you can implement inside of Listen Layer. Now, this is intended to primarily target native browser storage, which means anything outside of Listen Layer is what we consider to be native. So it could be browser storage activity that's occurring because of another tool like HubSpot or Google Analytics, or it might simply be browser storage that's built into your website. For example, if you have a custom shopping cart and you accumulate information about somebody's order as they progress through that, oftentimes that might be accumulated as a URL encoded cookie value. And Listen Layer can listen for that information and actually parse it out and put it into the data layer. So this is a really cool listener that basically bridges the gap between what you're working on in Listen Layer and what exists outside of Listen Layer. Now, it can target all browser storage. So if you are setting values inside of Listen Layer and saving those in the browser, you can actually use this listener to then respond and do something once that occurs, and do something in the data layer. So I'd encourage you to definitely dig into this one. It can be extremely useful in situations where you may need to accomplish these things. Now, just as an understanding of kind of the scope overall, this will allow you to target cookies, local storage, and session storage. And as usual, we're going to make sure that it's turned on, and then we're going to double check our features. We're going to want to turn on our activity features because those are what push information into the data layer. We have one feature per browser storage type. So cookies, local storage, and session storage, they all work exactly the same way. Each of these will correspond to a specific data layer event. And we can jump to the event screen and we can see that when your native cookie activity occurs, an event will always be pushed into the data layer just called native cookie. Now there'll be additional information in that data layer push that will help you to determine, well, which cookie did you see activity on? And that's obviously useful if you're targeting multiple cookies. There's also an event for local storage and an event for session storage. Now you can see here, we also allow you to target, you have to come into the Listen Layer and actually tell us what you want to target from a storage standpoint. So in this case, we're targeting local storage, 2 local storage keys. One of them is this visitor ID, and one of them is this user source first timestamp, which is actually set inside of Listen Layer. So this local storage key is being set by the user source listener as soon as we have the first user source date and timestamp, then we store that into the browser. And in this case, when this visitor ID is set, we want to push it into the data layer. We only want to push it in when it's set or changed by the website or an application. But down here, every single time the container loads, we want to push this timestamp in. And so it's really quite simple to set up. You have to understand your native data layer activity or your native browser activity or other browser activity that you're setting in Listen Layer that you want to do something with, and configure this accordingly. And one of those is to determine and tell our system here, is this a single value, a comma delimited value, URL encoded value, or a date function. Date functions allow you then to write some interesting rules, such as was this thing in the past or was it in the future? And you can push custom values into the data layer. If you want to dig into that, I would recommend jumping into this listener and check out, there'll be a video here posted soon for the custom data layer values, and that will talk about it. But in short, we have a rule here that basically is saying, hey, when we see this data layer activity, if this date and timestamp is in the past, then we're going to do something. We're going to push some other value into the data layer. We will soon be expanding this functionality so that there's more conditions you can write based on time. And currently this supports JavaScript time. So if we were to go into our website, you can see here, this is the time format that needs to be used for that to work. And in our user source listener, we can see how that timestamp is being set in the browser storage. And it is being done with this function that's just called full date timestamp. You can insert a function to store information into the browser storage. Okay, so let's take a deeper look at this. We have these three elements implemented, or these three features turned on. We are targeting our visitor ID and we're targeting our source first timestamp. And over here on our test website, we're going to need to clear out some of our browser storage, although I'm connected to GTM and it tends to log me out of Google and out of ListenLayer. So let's go ahead and just clear what we can here. Let's see if we get logged out. That token. Okay. All right, we're pretty clean here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to check out the console and we're going to put, let's do UTM underscore source. It's Facebook. What I'm doing is I'm giving myself a UTM value that I know is built into our user source listener. So the system is going to think that I'm coming from Facebook ads. And therefore, it's going to push some user source information into the data layer. And you can see that immediately happen here. We have user source information, and then we have two events called native local storage. And let's just jump back to our application storage here. We'll see now we have a screen1 VID. That value has been set, and that is one of our local storage keys that we're targeting. And here's the other one that we're going to be looking for is this user source first timestamp. And we can see that that was set as well. So what we'd be expecting now is, now that our application or website here has set some values or generated some activity inside of our browser storage keys that we're targeting here, we would expect those to go to be pushed into the data layer by the listener. And that's exactly what's happening here. We have this native local storage, which you can see it'll print out here in the data layer. It'll push in the native name. So that's the actual element you were targeting. And that's how you can differentiate between, this native local storage versus this native local storage here. This one is that visitor ID set, and this is the timestamp. And you can see here the actual value is pulled out of the data layer, or sorry, out of the browser storage and put into data layer. And we can write rules to push custom values in, which obviously comes from the custom data layer values feature here. In this case, we do have a simple rule written to determine if this timestamp is in the past, and it is in the past because there was a slight delay between when the actual user source ID was set and when the listener identified it and pushed that into the data layer. Again, in the future, we're going to have more advanced time-based features, so you could perhaps write a rule that says if a certain timestamp value is more than 48 hours in the past or something, likely based on milliseconds, you'd be able to calculate that. And you could then use that in your data layer to then determine, maybe I want to set some new value in my browser storage and overwrite something else or elevate some piece of user tracking information. And so you can really get pretty detailed with timestamps. Now that feature is not quite available yet. We just have kind of in the future and the past at this point, but that should be released soon. So check back often to see when that comes through. Now, as with everything else, I'd recommend jumping in and taking a look at the videos that are going to be posted on this listener, as well as we have our standard features like monitoring and reporting, which are important things to get familiar with. Hope you guys enjoy using the native browser storage listener.